Any tips on world building? Things like law, religion or lack thereof, people of the world, etc.?
I think the key thing in world building, in work on role-playing games, is to find a sweet spot between gameability and suspension of disbelief. And I call that sweet spot plausibility. So that means that something doesn't have to be exactly one-for-one accurate or doesn't have to exactly make sense. It just has to make enough sense to pass muster. You can think of it like how on old westerns, when they created the towns, it was really just the front and there was nothing behind it. But from the outside, it looks like a saloon or the Undertakers or whatever else. And if they did internal shots, they went elsewhere and they dressed up a room, right? So you can think of it in that same way. Most of the world that you create doesn't have to be exactly accurate. You can just have it be plausible, have it pass, a once-over look. And most importantly, I think it has to be internally consistent, right? So if you've got a rule for magic, don't break that rule for NPCs or story without some decent explanation as to why it's different in that particular case, right? This is what a lot of people who go, but my dragons, don't seem to understand about fantasy worlds. If anything, they're more demanding that they make internal sense and that the non-fantastical elements make sense rather than less. If you've got dragons, right, to keep people suspending disbelief, they have to follow their own rules, and everything else about the world has to make sense. Just because there's a dragon in your world doesn't mean that suddenly 20th century style wheelchairs make sense just because you want them to be there. You've got some work to do to explain why, and just pointing at a dragon saying, well, that won't do it, right? So plausibility and internal consistency. That's fairly general advice, but it was a fairly general question.